وآل محمد.
الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبه نستعين إنه خير ناصر ومعين. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلق أجمعين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى يوم الدين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ومن يتق الله يجعل له مخرجا ويرزقه من حيث لا يحتسب. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Dear brothers and sisters, Islam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is with a sorrowful pleasure that I am here with you once again and commemorating together the month of Muharram, the month of azab, the month of sorrow and tragedy for the Ahlul Bayt. This is a month in which the beginning of the month, the Ahlul Bayt, their entirety, would begin their process of azab. They would enter into a state of sadness and of tribulation. It is said that Imam Reza alayhi salam, our 8th Imam, he would tell some of his companions that whenever the month of Muharram, whenever these days would come, I would see this change in my father, Imam Musa al-Kadhim. I would see that he would enter into a state of sorrow. Maybe we can imagine the Imam would wear black. He would not allow any sort of merriment around him. He would be in a state of sorrow and tears would fall down from his glorious eyes. It is said that one day, one of the companions of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq said that came into the presence of the Imam, and he saw the Imam shedding tears and crying and wailing out loud. This companion, by the name of Ibn Sinan, was a very famous companion, very close companion to the Imam. And it was shocking for this companion to see the Imam in such a state. When we have sort of a vision and imagination of who the Imam was and who the Imam is, we think of a person who is very sort of, has a lot of grandeur. And so sometimes we think that the Imam does not have and does not express his emotion. Ibn Sinan, Abdullah ibn Sinan, it is said he comes into the presence of the Imam and he is shocked by the state in which he sees Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. He asks the Imam, has something happened? Has something befallen you? Ya Aba Abdullah, O Ja'far as-Sadiq? He says, Mima buka'uka la abka Allahu aynayk. Why are you crying in such a way? May Allah never make you sorrowful or make you cry. The Imam responds to Ibn Sinan. He says, are you in a state of neglect? قال الصادق أو في غفلة أنت. Are you not aware what days these are? It said, according to this report, that it was the day of Ashura. And the Imam is sitting in his home, it is said, all alone. And he is crying, and he is shedding those tears. And he says to his companion, do you not know what day this is? أما علمت أن الحسين بن علي أصيب في مثل هذا اليوم? Do you not know that Hussein ibn Ali, my grandfather, he was killed on this day? So we gather together every year, like clockwork. We gather together to commemorate these days. We come together, some of us might come to learn something new, and that is very good. Some of us might come to hear the recitation of a sha'r, of a manqabat, of a poem that we have heard when we were young, and that is very good. Those are the memories that we have to form as young children and allow our children to form when they are growing up. But ultimately, we are doing ziyarat of the Imam. We are paying homage and pledging our allegiance to the Imam once again. And so when we come to these majalis, we have to come with the proper intention, as though we are doing ziyarat of the Imam himself. It is said that according to the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, however far you may be, in whatever land you might find yourself in, it should not stop you from doing ziyarat of Aba Abdullah. You should turn towards the Qibla. Go in an open area, maybe on top of your house if you have a roof that you can go on top of, or maybe into a wilderness, somewhere where you are quiet, it is quiet and it is calm. And you turn towards the Qibla, and you orient yourself and your soul and your heart towards Aba Abdullah, and you say, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. That is the purpose of these days, that we orient our lives and our hearts and our souls towards Imam Hussein. Again, I said, there are sometimes that we come into these majalis expecting to learn something new, and that is important. Our ilm and our learning is one of the commandments of the Ahlul Bayt, and in particular Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So we should always be in this process of learning and of growing in our minds and in the things that we know, particularly about our religion. So when we come into these majalis, we should have that intention. And we should also have the intention of hearing and of seeing the things that we are accustomed to in these majalis. But ultimately, our goal is our heart and our soul. When you go towards ziyarat, visiting the pilgrimage of the Ahlul Bayt, this is an act, a rite, a ritual that was taught to the school of the Ahlul Bayt, the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, from the Imams themselves. When we think about what are the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt and where is the source and the origin of these majalis, we only have to look at the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. They taught us not only the fact that these majalis are important, but as well, they taught us how to perform these majalis and how to perform ziyarat and pilgrimage towards Imam Hussein. There are various ahadith and entire books that have been compiled about ziyarat. One of the famous books in an early period was a book called Kamil al-Ziyarat by a very famous student and a very famous scholar of the school of the Ahlul Bayt. This man, this scholar, he compiles an entire book, multiple ahadith, talking about first the ziyarat of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Then Then the ziyarat of the shuhada of Uhud. Think about the place. It is Madinatul Nabi. And so the book is ordered in terms of the places that you go. In Madinatul Nabi, you have the ziyarat of Rasulullah, you have the ziyarat of the shuhada of Uhud, the uncle of Rasulullah, Sayyid al-Shuhada of his own time, and the other shuhada of Uhud. And there are other places of ziyarat in the city of Medina. And then the book talks about the ziyarat of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. After listing some of the A'imma in the city of Medina and their ziyarat, talks about the ziyarat of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and then it has a very long chapter, one of the largest amount of ahadith we have is particularly about the ziyarat of Aba Abdullah in the city of Karbala. And the Imams, they describe very interesting, and interesting is maybe a poor choice of words, but something that we might not quite expect. They talk about how the Anbiya, the prophets of Allah, people who came before Aba Abdullah, they would as well do ziyarat of Imam Hussein. They talk about Rasulullah himself and how he would be told by Jibra'il, how Allah would send Jibra'il down to the Prophet to tell him what was going to happen to his grandson Aba Abdullah. And it continues and it continues. And it says each one of these individuals would cry for Imam Hussein before the events of Karbala and after those events. Until some ahadith, I'd like to mention one where this is reported from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. He says, please send a second louder salawat. There's a hadith listed in this book from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq in which the Imam says that first we've described all of the rituals of going and visiting the grave of Imam Hussein, something that it is said when people would come towards the city of Medina, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq would say to them, he would ask some of these people, where are you from? They would say, I'm from the land of Iraq. And he says to these people, he says, what is with you that you have the grave of Aba Abdullah in your own land, and yet you come to the city of Uhud and you want to pay visits to the shuhada of Uhud. You have such a great resource in your own land, a resource whose visiting of whose grave, the pilgrimage to the grave of Imam Hussein, is worth Hajj and Umrah. Rather, 70 Hajj and 70 Umrah. Think about the greatest pilgrimage that the Muslims know and knew. It was the visiting of the house of Allah himself. And the Ahlul Bayt, they say the value of visiting Imam Hussein is greater than this ritual that Muslims engage in. Inshallah, if we have the time to talk about it in the next few nights, maybe we can decipher and try to uncover what is the message that the Ahlul Bayt are trying to give us. But in this one hadith, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq says, أَمَا تُحِبُّ أَنْ يَرَى اللَّهُ شَخْصَكَ وَسَوَادَكَ فِي مَنْ يَدْعُو لَهُ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ وَعَلِيٌّ وَفَاطِمَةٌ وَالْأَئِمَّةُ. Do you not want Allah to see you and the people who surround you and your progeny amongst the people, not just who cry for Imam Hussein, not just who visit his grave, but the people who Rasulullah himself and Amirul Mu'mineen and Lady Fatima, they do dua for them. They ask Allah to increase His ni'am, His blessings upon those people. Because they are coming to cry for their grandson. They are coming to cry for Imam Hussein. I mentioned this book talks about ziyarah. When we go towards ziyarah, the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt is that you have to prepare yourself. You first do ghusl for those who have gone to ziyarat, whichever ziyarat you might have. There are certain rituals that you have to do before you enter that sacred haram. First is you have to do ghusl. You have to purify your body. Then you have to wear your cleanest clothes. Don't enter into the haram, into the presence of the Ahlul Bayt in clothes that you might use to go shopping, you might use to go to work. This is the presence of the awliya Allah, the friends and the companions of Rasulullah, the progeny of Rasulullah, the Aimma. And so go in your cleanest clothes. Prepare yourself and your body. And purify, most importantly, your intentions. And then you walk towards the haram. Take slow steps. Reflect on who you are going to see. This is an entire process. We start with our physical body, and then we are trying to orient our physical body according to the spiritual realm, towards that which we know is the truth, the people of the truth. So we have to orient ourselves. We are an ummah of orientation, of the Qibla. We don't just think about what we know. We don't just think about good actions, giving to charity and of helping those in need. But ultimately is a matter of orienting our bodies, our minds, and our souls. That is the key. The one thing that will remain for us on the day of judgment is our orientation, is where our heart is. In the Quran, Allah says, there is going to be a day, لا ينفع مال ولا بنون. It's going to be a day in which neither your wealth, nor your children, nor anything else you might think of is going to benefit you. And then Allah says a very beautiful verse that gives us the key into the entire religion of Islam. إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهُ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Except the person who comes towards Allah on that day of judgment, who comes towards Allah with a purified heart. That is what will be left for us. When we think about what is it that makes me human, that makes my life worth living, it is the hope, it is the potential of having a heart that is purified, that can come into the presence of Allah. And so when we do ziyarat, when we go into the presence of the Ahlul Bayt, we talk about orientation. We look towards, when we want to speak towards Allah, what is the qibla that we turn towards? Which direction do we turn towards when we speak with Allah? The qibla. We turn towards Mecca, the Kaaba. But what's interesting is that when you go towards ziyarat, it is said that as you are doing ziyarat, you're supposed to take small steps. You say, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadun Rasulullah. You can say even the shahadatain, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. And then you enter into the presence of the Imam. A lot of different ziyarats, this is mentioned in particular, that you go towards the Imam. First, you might start at the head, the side of the head of the Imam. And then you might do another ziyarat at the feet of the Imam. And then there is a particular moment in many of the ziyarat that it says you look towards the Imam himself. and you put the Qibla behind you. We're orienting ourselves towards Allah through the means of His wali. The person who embodied Islam and embodied that Qibla better than any physical structure could ever do. We turn towards the Imam. We put the Qibla behind our back. Not to disrespect, na'udhu billah, the Qibla, but to identify the source and the meaning behind which that Qibla is supposed to point us. That entire meaning of Islam is embodied in certain individuals who gave their lives and gave their bodies and gave their souls in the pursuit of Allah. And so when it comes to Abu Abdullah, when it comes to the ziyarat of Imam Hussein, it is said that Rasulullah himself would do the ziyarat of Imam Hussein. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he would pray for those who would come and do ziyarat of his son, Lady Fatima Al-Zahra. She takes consolation. She asks her father, "Why is it that you cry so much when you see my son Hussein?" Rasulullah describes for Lady Fatima all of the events that are going to happen in these next few days. Maybe Rasulullah says that he is going to be left thirsty and the water is going to be cut off from the camp. Maybe Rasulullah tells Lady Fatima how one by one Imam Hussein is going to send off his children, his nephews, his brothers, and he is going to turn towards the camp and he's going to see his women folk being left all alone. He's going to leave them for the sake of Allah. And Lady Fatima, she hears all of this sad news, of this prophecy of Rasulullah. And she says, "What can I take consolation in? Oh my father, you tell me all of these trials that are going to happen to Imam Hussein. What am I going to take consolation in?" And Rasulullah says that, "Oh, my daughter Fatima, you can take consolation in that one day there are going to be a people who are going to come and visit your Hussein. There's going to be an entire ummah of people, crowds and crowds who are going to come towards your Hussein. They are going to keep the memory and the message of Hussein alive. And so in these nights that we come, let us hope to learn something new from the journey of Imam Hussein to Karbala. Let us hope to cry a few tears for Imam Hussein. This is one of the blessings that Allah has bestowed upon us, that He allows us to cry, and He allows us to open our hearts and to shed our tears, and to allow Imam Hussein and the ashab and the awlad of Imam Hussein into our hearts. Let us allow those memories to be made. When you go towards ziyarat, for those who have grown up visiting the ziyarat of Abu Abdullah, those who are of other places, they might remember growing and visiting the haram of Imam Reza or Lady Ma'suma, alayhim as-salam, or any of the other graves of the Ahlul Bayt. You might remember there's a certain place that I would go to. You might think to yourself, this was the place that I would go to when I was young, and this is where I would sit. And these are the ziyarat that I would read. You have those good memories. That is what we want to do, and we want to inculcate and teach our children. That there is a certain adab, a certain behavior that we have. There are certain good memories that we have when we come into these majalis. We would remember the stories of Qasim, of Ali al-Akbar, of Aum, of Muhammad. We would remember the stories of Lady Zainab. And as soon as I would hear the name of Imam Hussein, it would not be in my control and my eyes would well up in tears. And then I would hear a line of poetry that I grew up with and I have grown familiar to, that has become familiar to me. And as soon as I would hear those lines, I would cry for Imam Hussein. But ultimately, brothers and sisters, what we have come here to do is to orient our hearts and to attempt to come to that qalbun salim, to orient our hearts and purify our hearts in the majlis of Imam Hussein through those tears. That is our ultimate goal. Inshallah, in these next few nights, we'll try to talk about some of the lessons that we can gather from the majlis and from the journey of Imam Hussein, from those words that Imam Hussein would teach to his children and to his womenfolk and to the entire caravan. Lessons that have been passed down generations to us. An entire culture, an entire civilization has been created and has been passed to us as a gift and more importantly as a responsibility. And we have to pass this on to our children and to generations to come. Inshallah, the next few nights we'll talk about some of those lessons. Fortunately, I'm already out of time. I wanted to talk about one of the most important lessons that Imam Hussein would give to his caravan in those final moments. It is said that on the day of Ashura, Imam Hussein would send out his companions, and one by one they were killed. Some of them killed by the camp, and some of them killed in combat against the enemy. And then the Imam would send out one after another members of his own family. Muhammad, Qasim, Aliyun al-Akbar. One by one they would go out into the battlefield and they would fight, until it was Imam Hussein and Abbas left all alone. And even Abbas goes out and he fights. Then there was a time when it was Imam Hussein left all alone. And Imam looks towards his camp and he sees that there is no one left except for the womenfolk and the children. And it is said that the Imam prepares himself for battle. And it is said that in certain reports, the womenfolk would come and they would circle the Imam and they wouldn't allow him to go out. In one of these instances, the Imam would tell the womenfolk, would tell his family to have courage and have patience. Don't allow for these enemy soldiers to hear your wails and your cries. And then the Imam would go out into the battlefield. And then the Imam would come back. In one of these instances when the Imam comes back, he says these words, استعدوا للبلاء واعلموا أن الله حافظكم وحاميكم. These are moments, the final moments of the life of Imam Hussein. And he says these words, almost hinting at the fact that, oh Zainab, prepare yourself. You have a long journey ahead. He says, prepare yourselves for a huge and large trial, a trial you have never seen before. استعدوا للبلاء واعلموا. And know, despite and through all of those trials that you are going to see and you are going to witness, and your bodies are going to bear witness to through the lashes and the swords that are going to hit you, through the bodies that you are going to see lying on the ground, through my own body. Prepare yourselves for those trials, but know, Inna Allaha hafidukum wa hamikum. Despite all of those trials, know that Allah will protect you. And Allah will be your guide and will be your protector. Have faith. have taqwa. Protect and preserve yourself throughout all of the trials that you might face. وَسَيُنْجِيكُم مِّن شَرِّ الْأَعْدَاءِ وَيَجْعَلُ عَاقِبَةَ أَمْرِكُمْ إِلَى خَيْرٍ. And Allah, He will preserve you, and He will save you from the worst that the enemy soldiers can do. Min sharril a'ada. The worst thing that they could possibly do, remember that Allah is watching. And He will make the ultimate conclusion of what you will face. وَيَجْعَلُ عَاقِبَةَ أَمْرِكُمْ إِلَى خَيْرٍ. He will make that ultimate conclusion into something which is good. We say, when we talk about Allah, when Allah talks about Himself, we read in the Quran that Allah brings the dead back to life. And He brings the living to death. He takes people from darkness and He places them in light. And He takes those who are in light and in blessing, and He takes them and He places them into darkness. And so Allah is ultimately watching over each and every one of you. These are the final moments that Imam Hussein is hinting towards his caravan. But the aza of the Ahlul Bayt didn't stop in those moments of Karbala. I wanted to mention the story of Nabi Yaqub. When Nabi Yaqub, he sees that his son Yusuf has been sent away from him. It is said that he cries days and night, all until he loses his eyes. He loses the sight in his eyes. And many of you have heard this story. It is said that when Imam Zainul Abidin, Ali ibn al-Hussein, one day, I mentioned these stories of the Ahlul Bayt. Each and every one of them, we have a hadith about how they would cry for Imam Hussein. But none were like Ali ibn al-Hussein, who saw the events of Karbala unfold in front of his eyes. It is said that Imam Zainul Abidin, one of his own companions, would come into the presence of Imam Zainul Abidin. Now know that Imam Zainul Abidin lived for at least 40 years or so, 30 years or so, after the death of his father. Many decades. And yet it is said that Imam Zainul Abidin would cry, and he would shed so many tears that his companions and his servants would be afraid for his own life. They would come to the Imam and they would say that you have become weak and your body has become frail, and we see you cry day and night for Imam Hussein. Whenever the Imam would see a cup of water, it is said that the Imam would cry so many tears that his tears would become mixed with that water. Whenever he would see someone in pain, he would remember his father. Whenever he would see someone in trial, he would remember his father. And every year, Imam Zainul Abidin would remember his father. And so one day, one of the servants of Imam Zainul Abidin, one of his companions, he comes to the Imam and he says, Ya Zainul Abidin, Ya Sayyid al-Sajidin, we have seen you cry so many years, and so many years have passed since your father was killed in the plains of Karbala. We understand, and some of us might say the same thing if we were in that place. We understand that your father was killed, and his body was lying there in the plains of Karbala. We understand, but why cry so much? Might cry for a year or two, but why cry for all of these decades? Imam Zainul Abidin turns towards this one servant of his and he says, Nabi Yaqub, he cried for Yusuf for years and years until Yusuf grew up into a man and he became the Aziz of Misr. And Yaqub knew that one day he is going to see his Yusuf once again. He knew that Yusuf was alive. And yet Yaqub cried until he lost the sight in his eyes. And yet I have seen my father, my imam, being killed right in front of my eyes. His body being trampled by the horses, his head being removed from his body. Do I not have enough right to cry like Yaqub, such that I might lose my eyes and my body might become frail? Is that not something that I have a right to do? These are the moments that Imam Hussein, the days that Imam Hussein is journeying towards Karbala. Before the Imam journeys towards Karbala, he has to leave the city of Medina, the city of his grandfather, the city of Rasulullah. I mentioned that there were times during the life of Rasulullah that Imam Hussein, he would see his grandfather crying. And it is said that Rasulullah would hold Hussein in his arms. And Hussein would ask his grandfather, Ya Rasulullah, why do you cry so much? And it is said that Rasulullah would respond, Oh my Hussein, I see Jibreel has come to me, and I see that he is telling me what is going to befall you one day. And it is said that in some of those occasions, Rasulullah would begin to kiss the body of Hussein. It is said that he would kiss the cheeks of Imam Hussein. He would kiss the neck of Imam Hussein, this little infant grandson of his, and he would shed tears. And he would say, I am kissing the place of the swords. I am kissing the place which the swords and the spears and the rocks and the wood is going to hit the body of my grandson. And he is going to be cut into pieces. And so it is said that in those final moments that Imam Hussein is leaving the city of his grandfather, Madinatun Nabi, Imam Hussein comes towards the grave of his grandfather. And he bids his final farewell to Rasulullah, this city that he knew well, this city that he grew up in. And yet, in those moments, Imam Hussein, he says to Rasulullah, look what your ummah has done. They have made me flee from your city. They have made me flee from your side, O Rasulullah. It is said that in those final moments before the Imam departs, Imam Hussein enters into a state of dreaming. And he sees Rasulullah calling to him, Ya Hussein, we are waiting for you. Come towards us. And Rasulullah holds Imam Hussein in his arms. And it is with this dream and with this sight, this vision, that Imam Hussein begins his journey. And it is with this dream and with this vision that Imam Hussein continues his journey towards Mecca. And then he leaves the city of Mecca and he begins his journey towards Iraq, knowing that a trial is going to befall him and befall the rest of his companions and the rest of his family. It is in those moments we think the tragedy of Imam Hussein ends with the Imam. The Imam knew what was going to happen after he has gone. And so we hear the words of Imam Zainul Abidin, that I cry not because of what befell my father, but I cry because of the disrespect that was shown towards my aunt Zainab, towards the little children that were scattered across the desert, like beads that have been torn apart and have been scattered across the floor. I cry for those children. I cry for those moments in the city of Kufa, when the city of the people who were raised by Amirul Mu'mineen, who remembered Amirul Mu'mineen. These are the same people who would mock and tease the family of Rasulullah. I cry for the city of Sham, a city that threw whatever they could and tortured and ashamed the family of Rasulullah. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون.